banking was for the first 10 years of my career out of college, 81 to 1991.
Right.
And then I had an opportunity to go to Dean Witter at the World Trade Center.
I remember.
And several of the senior executives of Dean Witter were former clients of mine, which is what got the introduction. And it was actually quite interesting, the whole interview process. I started with the CEO, who then sent me, who was a client, and then he sent me to the national sales director, who was a client, and he sent me to the head of marketing, who was a client, and then he sent me to another guy, and the other guy looked at my resume and saw these buck slips attached from the CEO and the head of national sales, and he said, I don't really have any questions for you. What would you like to ask me, and what do you want to do here?
And when do you want to start?
and when is your start date? And it was a great time in that I was able to, in effect, craft a job description.
Okay, so what was your thought process at that time, given you were given a pass and an open layup to the hoop?
Well, I was offered one or two paths at Dean Witter at the time, and this was directly from the CEO. One path was to become...
CEO was who? Was that Purcell at the time?
It was Jim Higgins.
Jim Higgins,
Phil
right.
Purcell was chairman of the board.
Okay, right.
Jim gave me two opportunities. One was to become a financial advisor, which is, as you know, purely commission-based, and it's building your book of business and your book of clients. Right. And that's how he had come up through the ranks at Dean Witter. He started out as a financial advisor and moved up over the years. Or to come on the corporate side and help develop some of the risk management strategies and begin to get involved with existing lending on margin loans to their clients, and then start to look at product development in some areas that they did not have a presence but wanted to develop a presence over time. And so they figured they could leverage off my bank background to begin building some of those programs out.
So, okay, so you chose B.
I chose B, yeah. I was accustomed after 10 years in banking, I was used to getting a paycheck every week. Right. And starting at zero on a commission-based sales front didn't really appeal to me. Yeah. Perhaps in hindsight, I should have chosen A, because A also doesn't have a ceiling or, for the most part, really doesn't have any bosses to work for. You're kind of an independent salesperson.
Or I'll add another thing, and we'll get to it. When you were at Morgan Stanley and you were using our research to decide which stocks I'm not going to allow margin loans for, which saved them billions of dollars. No one came up to you and said, you saved us billions, here's a $10 million bonus.
No.
Playing defense didn't create bonuses. Whereas had you been on the other way, there's no limit. That's another piece.
Yeah, if you think about it, mitigating risk in terms of stock positions and loans against those stock positions.
Which should have been well compensated.
It should have been, but it actually puts you in almost direct conflict with the financial advisor who's advising that client.
Yeah, we'll talk about that as we get to job number 3 at Morgan Stanley.
Sure, yeah.
Whatever it was, 2 or 3. I'm not, business 2 or 3, not job 2 or 3.
Yeah, I was, so I went in to basically get involved initially with the risk management on the margin side.
Right,
and,
at Dean Witter.
At Dean Witter.
Okay, how big a book was the margin business then at a place back then?
Yeah, back then in the early 90s, it was probably about $1.2 billion, $1.3 billion.
Which is nothing now.
Which is nothing now.
Nothing.
Right. No,
literally.
Very small book.
But back then that was a big business.
Yeah, and interest income generated from the margin lending at any of the Wall Street firms, that is a very huge part of the
What year was that? What year we're talking?
That was 1991.
So let's just for a second, stock market, right?
Yes.
It's now the Dow's 25,000, 24, 26 in that range.
Yeah.
It was 1,082.
Right.
It was 1,066. Basically, it was for 16 years. People don't realize this. We're kind of giving a history lesson. The Dow did not move up for 16 years. Then from 82 till today, it's gone up, not straight, but 25 times. Right. You, at the time, in 91, the Dow was probably, my guess, 7,000, 8,000.
Yeah, I'm not even sure it was that
high.
Not
even that high. So $1 billion of margin on a lower, like today would be $3 billion of margin, assuming there was no Apple, there was no any of this stuff. There was no, FANG.
Well, there really were no technology stocks like that. I mean, if you think about Microsoft went public in 1985. Right. Just to put it in context, and certainly none of the technology stocks that we know today existed as companies.
And you dealt with every one of those stocks for margin that were extant at the time.
Absolutely.
You had to know stuff about
Yeah, the key things you had to know were their price volatility, the liquidity. Liquidity was actually more important because you had to know your trading desk could get out of a position if they had to during financial distress in a market.
Right.
Whether it was broad-based, like a biotech sector, or whether it was concentrated on a company like. I remember when Johnson & Johnson had the big scare with Tylenol.
Yes.
The price plummeted. Merck with their Vioxx drug.
You've lived through all this.
Absolutely.
And all the Jersey biotech companies obviously was a sweet spot because they were...
Yeah, there were a lot of them headquartered here. A lot of pharmaceutical headquartered in New Jersey. And I had, it was interesting because I had some of the senior executives of those companies as clients in the private banking group at Summit.
Really?
And then you also saw a fair amount of margin lending on those high market caps like the J&Js and Mercks of the world. The CEO who hired me, part of what he wanted me to bring to the table discipline-wise was most Wall Street firms up till that point in time loaned strictly on the value of the stock. And I made an argument that we should have more financial information on these borrowers. And for large loans, we should have personal financial statements and tax returns.
So explain to me, let's say take IBM. IBM's $100.
Sure.
And the guy has $1 million of IBM.
So I'd lend him $500,000, Reg T, 50% of the value of the IBM stock initially.
Right.
And then he would have to maintain that at a 30% equity position, given any volatility in IBM stock.
Okay. So what was your idea?
Well, my idea was, let's say it's not IBM, but it's a biotech stock or an airline stock, startup airline, where the founder's whole net worth is tied up in that stock, and it may or may not be as liquid as IBM, probably not.
Right.
It may be much more volatile than IBM. And so my view was we should have more financial information on that individual so we know what his staying power is and whether he has any financial flexibility.
Outside his holding in that...
Outside the holding in that specific security.
Right.
Right.
And that wasn't being done?
It was not. No,
that industry-wide?
Industry-wide.
Wow.
It was not being done.
Interesting.
Right.
So they were a great risk then, these
wirehouses. I think it was a different approach from my banking background versus a Wall Street background. Even though they're both in financial services, the way they approach business and manage risk was, quite frankly, dramatically different from one another.
So they listened to you and actually...
They did. And, I mentioned airline stocks. I remember in the early 90s, there was an airline that had a crash in Florida called ValueJet. And we had the founders of the company, and they had margin loans against the stock. And that created a situation, that could have been quite problematic when the FAA shut down ValueJet. And fortunately, these same individuals had other assets away from the stock, and we were able to use that to give them time and some leverage away from what was happening to the airline.
But that was a decision you made to introduce other assets.
Absolutely, yeah.
And of course, no bonuses for that, right?
No bonuses for that. Actually, a lot of
a theme.
Yeah,
no bonuses for saving a lot of money.
Well, and I remember, when that airline had the situation, I remember talking to a friend of mine who worked for one of the major airlines, and I asked him, out of the blue, what do you think the likelihood is the FAA shuts down this airline? And he said it's pretty likely. He said, unlike the airline I work for or some of the other majors, they won't shut that down because it's critical to commerce on a daily basis. But a regional airline or a small startup airline could very well get shut down for safety reasons. And so when I proposed that was a possibility, a lot of people around the table kind of, nay-nayed the idea and said, no, that's not going to happen. And then when the FAA actually did shut down the airline for a short period of time, the head of operations was stunned and wanted to know how I knew that was going to happen before it happened.
Well, that's going to lead. I'm going to take a break in the action of getting to this point. Although, let's finish because I want to go back to your upbringing and your father, the phone lineman, and all the things you learned from him, which you have told me over 30 years more than once are numerous lessons you learned from your father about thinking about risk.